Good morning, everyone, and welcome. And I say morning for some of you in other time zones with a little bit of an apology. But here we are. It's my great honor to introduce our keynote speaker, Linda Lagarde Grover, who's here with us now. I first met Linda earlier this year through ASAIL, which is the Association for the Study of American Indian Literatures. And I was thrilled when she accepted my invitation to be our keynote speaker for this conference. Linda is Professor Emeritus of American Indian Studies at the University of Minnesota, Duluth, and a member of the Boyce Fort Band of Ojibwe. She's the author of a short fiction collection, a collection of poetry, a memoir, 3 novels, which I've read and highly recommend. And let's see, a creative nonfiction book. She has received the Flannery O'Connor Award and the Janet Heidegger Kafka Prize, whose previous recipients include Ann Patchett, Ann Tyler, and Toni Morrison. So she keeps me company. Her second novel, The Road Back to Sweetgrass, was awarded the Native Writers Circle, the America's First Book Award. Her talk today is titled Cedar and Sweetgrass, Native American Storytelling in Fiction, Nonfiction, and Poetry. Please let's give a warm welcome to Linda Lagarde Grover.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jill. Okay, excuse me. Bonjour, my name is Linda Lagarde Grover, and I'm here in northern Minnesota. I am a member of the Boyce Fort Band of Ojibwe, which is in northern Minnesota. I'm here in Duluth. Our reservation lands are quite a bit north. I'm probably about 45 minutes to an hour south of the Canadian border. And we've been here for a very long time. And I'm here to talk a little bit about how the tradition of passing knowledge interweaves with writing of fiction, nonfiction, poetry, really everything, and the continuity of a people. Long time ago, hundreds of years ago, our band, like many other Native bands, traveled here from somewhere else. We were on the east coast of this continent, in the area Maine, and then up into Newfoundland. And at one time, our story goes, which I heard from my aunt, who heard it from her aunt, from her aunt, from her aunt. The people were given a vision and direction to move westward. This happened probably around the time of very early contact from European countries. So over a period of time, then, we call it the Great Migration. We are certainly not the only people to have a Great Migration, in our history. But people traveled along a route, roughly along where the Great Lakes in North America is, to where we live now. And there were a number of stopping places where significant spiritual events occurred, and where many people just stopped and stayed. And so where we are, some of us went up into Canada, some went down underneath the Great Lakes, and where I live, we are at the kind of near the tip of Lake Superior. Our reservation lands were established in a couple of treaties quite a long time ago. The big one was in 1854, and these are land cession treaties where because this was a necessary thing, and our tribal leaders really didn't have a whole lot of other options. Large tracts of land were ceded or signed over to federal and state governments, and in the terms of the treaty, then much smaller areas of land then were most of the time in a process of just belonging to the government and then being ceded back to the tribe, to the band. And that is how our lands were established in most of the treaties in this area. We are a woodland people culturally. which means that, we're of the woods and have been, and, for hundreds and hundreds of years, in that journey westward here. I mean, it was certainly living, traveling along lakes and among the big trees. And so that is our way of living. And we still, even in Duluth here where I am, but all through the north here, we live among big trees. And in fact, the word, and it's a French term for our band, Bois Fort, is how we pronounce it, really means the big thick trees. And it is certainly, that is the terrain where we live. It's very rocky and a lot of trees and a lot of lakes. And our way of being, as it is with other tribal people, I expect all over the world, comes from the environment, from the land around us. Our life is, and our beliefs, our spiritual ways are all interwoven. All of our teachings are with the land and the terrain where we live. We have a storytelling tradition, and you likely have heard the term oral tradition, the passing of knowledge through spoken word. But I think sometimes that term in English kind of limits us to only speaking. And the passing of knowledge through stories involves certainly much more than the spoken word. It is how the teacher speaks, what the teacher selects to share, what is appropriate, what is meant to be for that time, and how the speaker acts and lives their life. And so to be a teacher in Ojibwe ways is a sacred trust. And we are all teachers, actually. So we live this way especially as we become older and have the knowledge that it is our privilege and our obligation really to pass to younger generations. We do this in a prayerful way. We Ojibwe people pray a lot. We are a people with very firmly rooted and yet very light and gentle and friendly spiritual ways and beliefs. Our storytelling and our way of passing of knowledge has been done as teaching, but also it's sometimes it is often a basic instruction. Watch what I'm doing, if you will. Think about it, practice somewhat, get some degree of mastery, become the person who does this, and then eventually become the teacher and the passer on of instruction. Whether it is a story, or whether it is something like sweeping the floor, washing dishes. And that is how we have learned as children, by watching, listening, and practicing, and then how we encourage younger people to do the same. Our stories are also beyond the passing of history. They can be instructional. They are certainly often very entertaining, and they are a historical narrative, so that we have a good connection to what is the past, what is the present, and then an understanding that in the continuity of things, then this will be the future, and we are contributing something that was given to us. It's a blessing, really. So in literature, I think we see the same thing. I am an Ojibwe person here. There are many different tribes in America and Canada and South America. I mean, in North America alone, there are more than 500 nations. We each have our own way of doing things, our own language, our own our own religious practices. And though, of course, they do overlap, in geographic area up here. Our practices are very much like the ones in the upper Midwest, woodland regions, and into Canada. We do this in in all of our writing, I think. And so I believe that Native people approach our writing, our sharing of the written word with those teachings in mind, and that it is of great importance to us in what we are writing and where it will be going in the present and in the future. I'm a emeritus professor here at the University of Minnesota Duluth. I retired 3 years ago. I've returned to teach a class and do a few things, here and there in our department. Our department has been around since really established as a department. Probably we were teaching Indian studies classes in the around 1969. We've been there for a while then, which is to me in my generation and what I've experienced in life quite an astonishing thing that I never really would have expected. I started to then UMD, University of Minnesota Duluth, is in Duluth, the city where I live, and I actually started going to school there out of high school in 1968, and I did not succeed. I was not prepared for college. It was culturally a very strange place, something that you really need to know what is it, at college, and how do you do this? How do you do this? In my case, it was even like, how do you work a doorknob? I was so intimidated by it. And so I didn't succeed, but I went back to school part-time over many years, and felt that it was something that one of my uncles, um, as I was going to school and working, told me that I was an education warrior. And with that, I was very, very touched, and understood then that he was not just bestowing a compliment on me. He was encouraging me, letting me know in this way that I am doing my little tiny part here for the people. And that is something that really motivated me then as I went to school and went through. It was a great thing for me when eventually I began to teach classes at a university. But during those years, from the time I started college and didn't succeed there, I lasted about, I don't know, 12 weeks. But since then, I learned a whole lot. Our education as Native people certainly goes far beyond being in school, as it does for everybody, in the world, whatever your education is, whether it is in a formal setting or the much broader setting of living life here. My family was a boarding school family, and so my generation in my family was the first one that would be going to school and living at home. In the couple, 2, 3 generations before mine, children were regularly removed from the home and sent away to go to school, to an Indian boarding school where there would be all American Indian children, students, and there they were going to be assimilated into larger American society, which sounds strange today, because certainly for a long time now we have thought of um, the integration of people into a larger pool of population. You would think that would mean putting them right in there among the population, but the odd thing is, with American Indians, this meant actually really removing them for their schooling. So I think that was the first that might have been the first mistake here in a process that created a great deal of harm and really affected many people and many families, including mine, deeply affected by this. And so that is why, to me, school, formal schooling, and being able to walk into this and walk through it means a lot more than getting a good grade. It means following in the footsteps of those who went before me and having others follow after me, trying to make things positive. We value education. I mentioned, that term, sacred trust, because passing of knowledge has been understood to be really basic for our continuity as a people, and has been so important, and the people who teach are so greatly respected. How did this concept become so convoluted and so damaging, um, as we kind of met up with larger systems of education? How did this happen? And so because of that, many of us have a lot that we have to deal with as we go to school. And our children today still do. Certainly when I was a child, older people did not sit around telling boarding school stories. They did not speak of it. And if they did, it was among themselves. Sometimes they would use Ojibwe language when they're speaking about things like this, and which made us kids really, really wonder, why are they speaking Ojibwe? Um, but the reason for that is that they wanted us to do well in school. They wanted us to succeed. And so our older people did not want to share difficulties about their own educational experiences with us. Though, of course, we understood that it must be very difficult if we are so fortunate as to be able to be at home among our families while we went to school. And the schools were very more often than not, very, very harsh places. There's a great sadness, I think, that follows us in formal schooling because of this. But that doesn't mean that we should just give up and not attempt to do well in learning things in school and otherwise as we can. So that's kind of the background for my own writing here. I've been, really, I'd say I'm one of the lucky writers, because I've actually, been able to have things published. I've you know I've been I've written, some papers and things that have been published, and walking that line, um, it has not been an easy thing. I mean, so much of the academic world, to me, seemed really exclusive, and very narrowing. And I think in school, I've worked in Indian education in pre-K through 12, far up north, and also in Duluth here. I've had many, many different jobs during my work career. And we've in encouraging our children, we also, in walking through that, had to deal with an education system that, I mean, you know how it is. You, even starting when you're very young in formal schooling, there's evaluations and grades that are constantly narrowing, because how do you get an A? And when you get an A, you're kind of, leaving. It's almost like a pyramid. You're leaving other people behind you, and it's kind of diametrically opposed, I think, to our way of living where everybody is supposed to be respected and loved and being part of everything. And I've wondered about that for a long time. How do you reconcile this? And I'm not sure if you actually can. Somewhere not long ago, I was giving a talk where a participant in the audience asked me about reconciling the past with the present. And, I thought about that as I was talking, as I was answering, and I kind of came to the conclusion that actually, I don't know if you really can. I think you have to understand it and acknowledge this.
我也认识珍妮很久了，以前二姐还帮珍妮补习过。
Understand and acknowledge, and then see what you have to work with. I mean, what's the hand you've been dealt, and then what are you going to do? In my case, I wanted very much to be able to pass on in the way that generations before me had a knowledge and also just experiences of things. And that's why I began to write. I was really encouraged by a couple of my older relatives to do this. But I found that it was easier for me in many ways to write fiction. So I began to write short stories. I had worked in studying Indian education and particularly the boarding school system, and even more particularly one of the schools that people in my family had attended. And as I was doing that, I came across a lot of information and a lot of people who had stories that I really wondered how we could pass on without being really specific about things, because certainly, I many people have supported me during my pursuit of these things, and I want to honor them and to respect them, but also to respect their I don't know, their privacy, and to not take advantage or exploit in any way. And so that has really guided what I write. And I think this guides a lot of stuff that American Indian people write. There are there are books and studies out there about, many of them about similar backgrounds that are labeled specifically nonfiction. But I felt that there was a freedom in writing fiction. So I began to write short stories. And my first book then was a set of 8 short stories, and it it is called The Dance Boots. I don't know if you can see this, but I'm going to hold this up here. I like the cover. Actually, I like it because the back of it looks like birch bark, and we are a people up north here of a birch bark people. So we our mode of travel on water has been canoes, and in back of me there's a little birch bark basket. So I started writing about that because of one of my aunts who had been so generous and so supportive of me. And she wanted very much to tell me stories about our family. I was so I just was so appreciative that she would do that. And I wondered why she did. And, I thought, well, and she and then other relatives and then other older Native people, as they're doing this, I thought, well, are they doing this just because they like me? But I understood after quite some time that they were passing on knowledge. And so then I thought, how will I do this? So I've done it mostly through fiction and essays and some poetry. So The Dance Boots is about a woman, something like me, I think, and her older relative who began to tell her some things about her family. And after the older relative died, the fictional young woman then is telling us more about that fictional life. I enjoyed fiction so much that I stayed writing about this fictional reservation up north. It's something like Bois Fort, something like Fond du Lac and Grand Portage, which are the other reservations up north in northeastern Minnesota. But it's fiction. And so I continued with that, and then thought I would like to write about federal Indian policy, which our Department of American Indian Studies, this is what we do, is federal Indian policy and tribal sovereignty. And I thought, well, how am I going to tell this story in a way that my aunt and my uncles, my mother, would appreciate and enjoy perhaps reading, because I want to use a voice that is ours, and that would be in common with them. And so that's my style of writing. And my dad paid me a real compliment once when he was reading something that I had written. He read it and he said, you write like an Indian. And I understood that he was talking about the voice and how important it is to write in that voice, of our experience up here. So in continuing writing about federal Indian policy, I began to write. I have a novel called The Road Back to Sweetgrass, which is about women my age from the time that they're like in their late teens and up through now. And what I wanted to do in my stories is have the story of people actually living their regular lives. I mean, they do things like have jobs and fall in love, get married, have challenges in life, but they are doing this against the backdrop of historical event and federal Indian policy of the time. And so just as it was with my first book, The Dance Boots, which was the entity that was present all the way through there was a fictional Indian boarding school. In the backdrop of The Road Back to Sweetgrass are the federal Indian policies of especially as the 1950s through the 1980s, when official federal Indian policy actually had a name. It's you just think, who thought of this name? It is called termination. You just go, what does this mean? What it meant was the termination of American Indian tribes as legal bodies, as legal entities. And so once tribes are terminated, then they have no citizens, they have no people. And so we'd just be gone. As you can probably see, the termination didn't really work and we're still here. But, the various programs there was a relocation program, there was the Indian Adoption Project, there were the mass sterilizations of young Native women, some men too, in the 1970s. That was all part of that federal policy. And so I wrote about that in The Road Back to Sweetgrass, in the experiences of the young people in this book and as they grew older. Then I continued with that policy studies, and my next fiction book then is In the Night of Memory, which is set in I guess fairly modern times, and it has to do, I started writing about Native children in the foster system. And as I was writing, the book turned into have a thread running all the way through, which is a missing Native woman, a mother. And this is the thread that runs through all of the book and these younger women's lives and their community. She is missing. When did she go missing? Where could she possibly be? What is life like with a hole in your family, in your community? And many families I know have a missing relative like this and have over history. And it's very sad that it's nothing new. It's new in national attention, but it is very, very sadly not new in our communities. Then my most recent fiction book is called A Song Over Misquah Rapids. And this continues this collective story of northeastern Minnesota Ojibwe. And this is present day and 50 years ago. So it is contrasting life today in Indian country up here with how life was 50 years ago. And there is a mystery in this book that is a thread that runs through here, and an event that happened 50 years ago that continues to be with us today, just as it is in real life. I know I'm getting close to the end of time here. I do have a poetry collection called The Sky Watched, Poems of Ojibwe Lives. And this is a 4-part saga, where I start with interactions with some of our old stories, my boarding school writing. I've written a lot of poetry about that. Continues this, and then I write about the aftermath of this on families and communities. And then the last section is life today, where we continue our ways and continue them in contemporary times, and continue our ways of being, our awareness of the world around us, all the earth and all the creatures and each other, and that the basic teaching of our spiritual ways and our way of life is a gratitude and a thankfulness for us, for everything that has been given to us, provided by the Creator. I'll quickly say I've written some essays, and this one is called Onagamacing, Seasons of an Ojibwe Year. And this book actually got the Minnesota Book Award. It's like 50 very short essays, kind of slice of life and history and philosophy, living the good way that we call Minnow Bimada Ziwin, the living of a good life. And it's I think it's really readable because everything is really short. You can just read for a short time and then pick it up when you feel like it again. And then my other essay book, essay, history, fiction, nonfiction, poetry, is called Gitchigami Hearts. And it is stories and histories of Masabikong, which is the Ojibwe word for this place where we live. It translates in English to the place of the giants, and it refers, I think, to the very large rock formations and their presence here. In our language, we don't have male-female genders, but we have animate and inanimate genders, which it's pretty easy to get used to if you're, for an English speaker, which I am. And rocks are animate. And, in English language, you think, well, they just sit there. But in Ojibwe ways, they aren't just sitting there. They are here, and we are living around and on, and they have great wisdom to them. So I'm looking at the time here, and I'm wondering if maybe this would be a good time to ask if anybody has any questions or comments. I'd welcome them. Otherwise, I have a lot to say.
Awesome. Thank you, Linda. Since I read all 3 novels recently, I wanted to say I liked all of them, but especially The Road Back to Sweetgrass. And although there's all this policy in the background, it's the characters and that setting that really drew me in. I loved Margie and Teresa, and then getting involved with Michael Washington and his father. And I just didn't see that coming. Like the one college girl marries, right? I don't know if she officially marries, but partners up with her friend Michael's father, who's got to be what, 30 years older than her?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Like just a caring, kind man. And it just sort of happened. So I don't know. I'm listening to what you're saying about how the point or purpose is to see where's the story going in the future. So in the next book, Miss Song Over Misquah Rapids, that is far into the future. And now these 2 college girls are Zoe Wash's age, older than he was in this previous book. So I guess where do you see this story going, since that's part of what you're considering? Where's the story going in the future? I'm just curious.
You know, in the Misquah Rapids book, Margie is really struggling to maintain, I guess you would call it, ownership of Sweetgrass, the area where they live. And she then, and people like her who believe this in a very large extended family community, are really wondering what is meant to be, what is the right thing to do. In this case, the tribe wants to purchase that and have it owned by the tribe, which is how lands were owned right after the treaties were drawn up. They were owned in commonality by all the band members. And then in the 1890s up through 1920, lands were divided up into individual parcels and allotted to band members. And if you ever hear that term, somebody's allotment or their land allotment, that is what that refers back to. And though many, many people lost their land allotments, in this case, in this book, this family has, and by this point there are, how many people are in this family? 100, 200 descendants of the original holder of the allotment. What is the right thing to do when the family has like legal title to this, but the tribe wants to own it? Do we go back to having the tribe own the whole thing? Is that really our traditional ways? Actually, you know, before the treaties, there was not really such a thing as legal land ownership among native tribes. It was more of the custom, you know, like this family always did their wild ricing in this area, and this family always did their maple sugar harvest in this area and always lived here in the summertime. And it was custom. And so every, you know, people, you know, respected this. This is where they live, but it's not like this is what they own. And so that is a question that is I'm beginning to address in that. And what I'm working on now is a continuation of that story. And you know, I was teaching a class. It was actually, I don't even know, I think it was a literature class some years ago. And there was a Native student in class, and he said that he thought the big theme in Native writing in literature was who has the right to be on the land. And that truly, you know, that student, I think, really got to the heart of things immediately in that class. I mean, we're talking like a week into class. And that steered the class in that direction for the rest of the term. And I thought this is really one of the big questions. Who has the right? And is it the legal right? Is it the moral right? Is it the spiritual right? Who should be there? And who's meant to be there? And so that is what I am kind of working on now with my next. But yes, against the backdrop of all this, we have Margie and her friends, and experiencing these many things. I mean, it's with Margie, you know, unrequited love is driving her life. And it's not that she has this hungry, unhappy life. She has a wonderful life. But it's funny how one thing in one's one experience in one's life just kind of, it's almost like playing pinball, you know, and you know, it's the ball is going to go this direction then, and that is, you know, that's determining what is going on with the rest of your time in the world.
Thank you. Does anyone else have questions here, any brief questions? We have a couple minutes left, and then we can continue this in the discussion session. Kinjo asked me to mention that at the beginning, but he did post a note about that in the chat. Any other questions? Well,
I want to say, oh, is there a question?
Here we go.
Oh, the animal aspect of rocks. Do they feel or simply witness? Animate, I mean. You know, we can't we can't speak for them, but I think that I think that I think that rocks are, I think they do feel, and I do think that they think, they observe, and they certainly have been here long before us and will be here long after us. And that I'm not doing a commercial here or anything, but in Gitchigami Hearts, that is a theme of this set of writings, and that is the very large gabbro rock formations in northeastern Minnesota, that they are here and we live our lives on them and around them. And in Duluth, where I live here, there were a couple of attempts to blast out a particularly large formation to straighten out a street right here in town in Duluth, and they were not successful. And even though the rocks show that great scars from those two attempts, just the same, the rocks are there, and we ended up just living our lives in Duluth around them. And that and having lived here, I was born in Duluth, and having lived all my life here, and watching my own relatives and friends and just live around these rocks and understand the solidity of what the earth has for us here is it is I don't know, it gives you kind of a feeling of awe and comfort at the same time.
Yeah. Wow. Cool. Beautiful. Yeah, thank you.
So, well, I'd like to say miigwech. That's our word for thank you. My dad taught us children. We did not grow up, speaking Ojibwe, but my dad wanted us to know some things, and he said if there's one Ojibwe word that you should know, it should be miigwech. Thank you. And so that's what I say to everybody here today. Miigwech.
Miigwech. Thank you, Linda. Thank you so much. Enjoyed your talk. I hope everyone else did. And we have the link here that Kinjo put into the chat if we want to hop over to the discussion. All right. We'll see you there. Thanks, everyone.